We are grateful to everyone who has joined and who will be joining. Um, to introduce further, my name is Abhivardhan. I am the president of the Indian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Law. We are a unique industry forum in a way that we engage in AI policy discussions from a market and industry viewpoint. Uh, ISAIL is a forum which is largely led by people who are tech law specialists or tech law practitioners. However, we have pivoted our approach to become a more inclusive forum for other players such as AI innovators, AI researchers, people who invest into AI, and even other stakeholders who are in the semiconductor side and other resource related aspects like data. ISIL was formalized in the year 2019, albeit it was conceptualized in 2018. And as one of the premier forums in its own right, ISAIL has been a quite unique forum while starting as a legal community, but now focusing more on market related realities through its own legal and policy knowledge that it has accumulated since 2020. Now, this discussion becomes quite interesting since we are hosting it in partnership with the UNU Global AI Network, and um, we are happy to have uh, our speakers in this session. Uh, but before we go ahead, as people are joining and this is subject to this discussion, it's interesting and important to understand what exactly AI governance is, what is its internal value, and I think then we'll quickly move on with the introductions. So, conceptually speaking, AI governance is a simple idea that any systems which involve automation, AI workflows, or let us say any form of machine learning systems involved. Technically, even robotics is considered under AI, but then again, robotics is more into aspects of automation in a hardware sense. So let us say that we are focusing on the software sense here, but or maybe a hybrid. But we can say that any form of automation could be in an umbrella sense classified as AI. So what is AI governance? Does it require a heavyweight legislation like legislations that have been proposed in Korea and either European Union, or we have lightweight approaches or sector-specific approaches that like we have in Japan and China, or we have advisories like we have in India and the UK, or we have contractual approaches like the United States has adopted recently after a new administration has come up. So AI governance could be anything, honestly, because at this point, a lot of approaches are just rivaling across. You have the EU AI Act. The Japanese have come up with several AI-related legal documents, legal instruments, which are of utmost value. Something is in the petrochemical sector, something is in culture and copyright. Either they're non-binding guidelines or they're binding guidelines, but they have their own value in their own. Even in China, we have seen instances that we have 4 AI and law related legal instruments, but they focus on entirely different things. They are very specific. So there are many examples. Even in India, this has been attempted. Some non-binding guidelines have come up from government institutions like ICMR and others. So governance can start with contracts. It can go to anything. But I think the most important part of governance in AI, which applies to all facets of tech governance, blockchain, IoT, anything, is how exactly the development, deployment, and use of a system is to be ensured. Do they align with certain human values, right? And I think that's where AI governance becomes important. Secondly, of course, then if we know that, yeah, what is it, then it comes on the why questions. What is the uncertain behavior around an AI system in the pharma sector or social sector or education or fashion or any field it could be? Is it propagating any biases, technical biases and socio-economic biases which are exacerbated? We can obviously say one of the most mainstream examples is social media algorithms. But then again, it's a very overbloated discussion at times in the academia and think tanks. But then again, I think it's a discussion that is important because a lot of recommendation algorithms are inspired by the rise of SEO and advertising technology. So, bias propagation definitely becomes an issue. With this is a thing which a lot of platforms have to face. Accountability gap. Who is responsible? Board of directors, a government officer who is at the end level, external level of implementing a policy against a bias and other things, or whom? And then even if all of this is sorted out or understood, what are the ethical dilemmas? So AI governance kind of addresses those kind of things, and that is unique in its own right. So that's there. Then of course the how you can do it. You can come up with ethical principles which are literally sometimes non-binding, but they have a universal value. So that's there. Some of them are binding in their own way, but usually they are not binding. But yes, of course, consensus, if happens, it shows that there's a sense for countries to move ahead with something. Like the UNESCO AI recommendation of 2021. And of course, there are AI action summits and other form of summits. In fact, India is going to host AI Impact Summit this year. So under the India AI mission, so of course, that's one of the examples. The regulatory frameworks, everyone knows, an act of parliament or a high-level legislation by an executive body. So that's there. But then again, there are other things also, organizational structures and stakeholder engagement. And therefore, we come on to the very simple question. What is AI governance? Localization. Localization comes from an idea. So, well, why are these photos being shown? So, well, Ayushi is here. So this year in February early, I had hosted an interesting session for as a part of a workshop where I actually had shown that we had certain discussions with product managers, developers, and others, like, is ethical AI important for them in India? And I discussed it in one of the IT hubs, that is Hyderabad, apart from Bengaluru and others. So it was a very interesting session because there were some insightful questions people were asking, and that kind of also inspired me as we had joined the Global AI Network, that why don't we discuss about localization to some extent? So thanks to Ayushi also for propping up that session well, and here we are. So quickly speaking, before we introduce the speakers, localization is about, let us say there are 2 or 3 countries. Each and every country, or whether say within the country, there are localizations which are happening in a way that there's a supply and value chain which affects things. And there are data protection policies, data governance policies, and AI governance policies. How do you really adapt to each of them sector-wise or sector agnostically? I think that is a huge challenge which comes. But if we kind of personalize it, then I think it makes things strategically better, even if legally speaking, it also could go at a bilateral level or a company to company level through contracts. So this is an interesting dilemma because not-for-profit organizations, for-profit organizations under the UN Business Compact, under which of course the UNU's initiative comes in, they also have to think about that beyond the vagaries of international law, because we are in the era of soft law. How are global AI standards at a market level be adopted? So this discussion centers around that, and that's why it's important to have introduction of speakers. Bahadur, I believe you can go ahead with the introductions, and that would be great. So yeah, you can.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to invite you to the UNU AI Network Dialogues with ISAIL. Today, we have a really great set of, interdisciplinary speakers and stakeholders. So I'll first introduce you to Mr. Francis Crawley. So Mr. Crawley is the CoData chair in the International Data Policy Committee. CoData is the International Science Council's Committee on Data. He specializes in research ethics, methodology, integrity, as well as data and AI ethics law and law. He's also the executive director of the Good Clinical Practice Alliance in Europe and the strategic initiative for developing capacity and ethical review in Leuven, Belgium. He's also the chairman of Research Data Alliance's Artificial Intelligence and Data Visitation Group. His focus is mainly in developing international and national good clinical practice guidelines, as well as education programs for health research and data privacy management as well. Next, we have Ms. Ayushi Agarwal. Ayushi is an AI entrepreneur specializing in AI interpretability. She has 12 patents and 10 research papers to her name, and her work mainly focuses on critical challenges in large language models involving causality, hallucinations, and needle in haystack information retrieval challenges. So previously, as the head of the data science and research at United We Care, she built one of the largest clinical knowledge graphs with 20 million nodes and 200 million uh, relationships. The research mainly focused on driving research on causality and implementing explainability in medical LLMs. The application is to integrate genetics, pharmacogenomics, and multidimensional health data research. Next, we have Professor Weiyu Zhang. Professor Zhang is the director of the Civic Tech Lab at the Department of Communications and New Media at National University of Singapore. Her research focuses on civic engagement and information and communication technologies. The research mainly focused on civic engagement and multinational projects based in Asia. The focus is on youth engagement, online deliberation, and civic tech in Asia. She Her research focuses on civic tech applications to facilitate uh, citizen deliberation on science topics like COVID-19, artificial intelligence, climate change, and novel food. Uh, Next, we have Mr. Christopher Zhu, who is the co-chair of CoData Connect. He is a climate and data scientist and has a master's in environmental technology from Imperial College London and a master's in mathematics from University of Oxford. He contributes to green finance, environmental management, and his focus is on using his expertise in uh, data science to ensure that data governance is aligned with sustainable development goals. Next, we have Mr. Vishwam Jindal. He's the CEO and founder of WebNyai. WebNyai is an online dispute resolution and grievance redressal platform that leverages generative AI to increase access to justice and simplify dispute resolution. He's a triple qualified lawyer who is an advocate in India and recognized as a solicitor in England and Wales. He is also a registered attorney in United Arab Emirates and has 9 years of experience in law firms like DLA Piper and Linklaters in Dubai and London. He also served as policy expert and consultant in organizations like WHO, UNICEF, and National Labour Organizations, and was also the founding member of the Abu Dhabi Global Markets Courts Committee when it started. And with that, I introduce all the stakeholders to the audience.
Thank you, Bahadur. We are also happy to have Francis, since we have realized that he's also here, and happy to have him. So I think to proceed with the discussion, and I hope the screen is still visible. I think an interesting aspect which we can begin with is sovereignty and interoperability. And since we have a reasonable time for Q&A, anyone who's in the audience can still add some questions in the chat. So questions would be appreciated. You can decide it now. We can address the questions later. That's perfectly fine. In certain cases, you can try to unmute yourself, unmute them, the audience, but we'll see if that's possible. But for now, I think one aspect to begin with is sovereignty and interoperability, because as we can see in the screen, and it's a very interesting topic, everyone comes up with their own frameworks. This is what has been the saying since the Bletchley Summit under the UK government. And why Bletchley? Well, yes, the UNESCO had come up with their own frameworks, but Bletchley was a pivotal moment because then a lot of important events like the Hiroshima Consensus and other things happened. Long back, even in China, I think we had an AI and education consensus that was done in 2018, if I'm right. And ITU is also there. But let's maybe start with some perspectives from maybe Francis to begin with. Because when we look at sovereignty per se, some countries and their units like the European Union have a very stratified approach. South Korea tried to replicate that, but again, that is still like they have a lot of legislative understandings, but some countries like Japan wish to be more specific and less authoritative in that sense. So Maybe we can start with Francis, and then maybe I think I would be happy to have other speakers add up in that understanding, maybe Dr. Zhang, followed by Vishwam, followed by Ayushi. But I think let's start with Francis in this case.
Well, firstly, I just want to thank you for having me with you. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
I don't have the best setup. Thank you. So it's really, I think this is a very important discussion that we're having here on AI governance. And actually, I think that sovereignty is perhaps one of the most critical issues that we have to address in the digital space, particularly maybe with regard to data, but also with regard to AI and how AI is working on our data today. I would, you're completely right. Europe is, in a certain sense, I would say, fascinated with sovereignty. Who owns the data? Who controls the data? Sovereignty also has to do not only with, let's say, ownership or being in charge of, but also it has to do with responsibility and accountability. So I think it's a very complex topic. I'd like to step back, though, just for a moment from the digital space and just look at sovereignty within the United Nations system. Sovereignty underlies, it underpins everything within the UN system. So the very first paragraph of the Charter of the United Nations, which is the overwhelming, over top framework in which all of the member states, 192, 193, I'm not sure right now, all of the member states agree to. This is the fundamental, let's say, treaty framework for sovereignty. And the United Nations is particularly interested in the idea of a sovereign state, that the states are sovereign and that the sovereignty of each state must be respected by all of the other states. But also in the Charter, what we see is that the sovereignty of the states is also derived from the people. So the sovereignty of the states is an expression, as the United Nations understands it, of the will of the people. But then there's also another sovereignty that's within this that we also often encounter as well within AI, and that is the sovereignty of the citizen, the individual. And that we see in the chart, in the Declaration on Human Rights, which says that the sovereignty of the state goes so far over its citizens, but there's a boundary to that sovereignty where they have to respect the rights of the individual citizens. And this is now going to play out in our digital space with regard to data and with regard to AI. The states are going to make a claim, and they did. Europe did, China did, India did. The US for sure will make a claim to sovereignty, no doubt about that. Mr. Trump will see to that. So Singapore will certainly make a claim to sovereignty. So they will make a claim to sovereignty because data has value. And one of the responsibilities of a state is to look after the wealth of the state, of the citizens there. So they will all make a claim to sovereignty there. But citizens will also make a claim to sovereignty. And the people, you can say communities in this case, but also the people in a kind of collective sense within states, will also make a claim to sovereignty. And this is the very difficult challenge that we have, because interoperability will have to be between sovereign entities. And just to take it one step further, when we speak about open science, we will have to speak about open science in terms of sovereignty. So this is the general framework that I have in mind anyway, and I hope to get it corrected here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that actually is quite lucrative to start with, I think. And the open science linkage becomes necessary because there's a huge need for global scientific consensus around AI. Like, I remember this discussion being kept a lot of times by experts like Dr. Gary Marcus, who say that we need an AI and science consensus in a way that, we have an institute which works on Large Hadron Collider, which is CERN in Europe. Similarly, we have the International Space Station. Should we have something in artificial intelligence, which goes for Gen AI or neurosymbolic AI or any forms of classical AI, right? So it's an interesting aspect because sovereignty claims will be made. And I think that's where I'd like to have Dr. Zhang to add further, and maybe I'll keep the floor open for speakers now in that sense. Maybe Vishwan can add up and Ayushi can add up.
Yeah, thanks, Abhivardhan, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I want to echo Francis that it's a great privilege to be here. It's my first time to directly talk to the Indian side of these AI game. Right? I'm very excited and very look forward to learning from all of you. I have to admit that I'm not a lawyer. I'm not trained in legal study, right? So I'm sure many of the attendees here can speak better than me in terms of sovereignty and all these legal principles behind laws and regulations over AI, right? Well, I guess I come here with a perspective of, how we can include citizens, right, into the idea of whatever control. You could call it local control, global control, ethical control, moral control, right, over this very uncertain and rapid development of artificial intelligence, right? So, echoing what Francis just said, right, citizens as individuals have sovereignties. They have their own rights. They need to be respected as humans, right? They have to have the right to work, to make a living, which are now all under threats of artificial intelligence, right? So I have always been wondering how we can effectively include citizen voices in this very complex issue of AI governance, right? The question you posted, Abhivardhan, I felt it's both a legal question and a technological question, right? When you say I want to control, want to have local sovereignty control, how, right? Is this possible? Is this even, feasible, given how the technologies are developed and used, right? So I can share with you an example from Singapore, right? Singapore is a small country. It doesn't really have its own AI technology. No, not at all, right? So they have to, everyone here, we have to rely on either a technology from the US, right, or from China, the more powerful states who produce these kind of technologies. How do we exert local sovereign kind of sovereignty control over AI? So what I have observed so far is this, right? So the Singapore government, especially the Ministry of Communication and Information, which is in charge of AI, right, has made a great effort to try to, exert control when they can, right? For instance, they have built a foundation called AI Verify Foundation. They gathered a bunch of technological experts, right, in the country and try to tap onto their expertise, and they build a framework, a very practical framework to verify the risks and the security associated with certain AI applications, right? So the companies, right? The big and smaller ones, they are not required to go through AI Verify. They're encouraged to go through AI Verify. When they have an AI product, they volunteer the product to the foundation for verification. The foundation, doesn't ask them for any resources. The foundation has resources from the government, right? So they do the verification. They come back with suggestions about, what part of the application may have ethical concerns, how the application may affect people's lives, right? So that's one thing they do, right? So at the local level, we can verify, very strong products and see whether these products would bring ethical challenges in the local context, right? So that's one way I feel the Singapore government is trying to exert some control over AI. A second case I observed in Singapore is this. Data, right? Francis just mentioned data. Data are extremely important for training AI. But we all know that the US originated or the China originated AI, they are not trained on data from our part of the world, right? The Southeast Asian region, right? So what the Singapore government has done was to organize, to basically get Southeast Asian language data as much as they want, as much as they can, right? So they also work with, other Southeast Asian countries to gather such data. So these are data basically based on previous, books, right? Books in these languages, or online discussion, online data, right? In these languages. Then they use these data as local data, but they don't have their own algorithm, their own AI, right? They use Llama. Llama is a global AI, right? They use Llama, but feed Llama with local data so that they can somehow localize Llama to answer local needs, right? So that's another way of so-called, localize AI, the global AI, right? So these are two instances I observed from Singapore, right? So I just want to share with everyone, and I want to hear them from the rest of the participants, your thoughts as well, right?
Yeah, Vishram, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhivardhan, and thank you for the opportunity as well. It's a privilege to be in this panel with such distinguished members. Just to sort of, I'm not going to repeat. I think Francis and Professor Zhang has already, I think, mentioned a few points. I think it's very interesting. I think we're seeing that, some of it in India and some of the other developing and developed nations as well. I think there's obviously a fundamental tension, if that's the right word, between, say, national sovereignty and global AI operability, I think. And I think to some extent, I think the future would be in a way that nations would keep trying to retain control as much as possible on things which are more fundamental at a national level. And some of the examples or some of the parameters that I think that would include are, for instance, everything to do around national security, everything to do around data privacy, especially, wherever it's STPD or it's sensitive data, for instance. And of course, the definitions vary, whether it's the European Union GDPR or the Indian data protection law, which is still taking shape. Another, I think, one or two important things, I think, which are generally quite critical is cultural norms, and specifically around content moderation as well. Like in India, we've got the IT rules 2021. We've got like tons of advisories in addition to the IT rules, advisories from different ministries, advisories from different state governments, which can sometimes conflict between different states as well. And of course, that is, completely very different from what content moderation or cultural norms would be, say, in Singapore or in the European Union or in the US or other countries. So I think I can definitely foresee over the next few years, I think, nations being extremely critical about some of these subjects and wanting to retain sovereign control over them. Whereas across, I think from a multi-jurisdiction perspective, I think, technical or data standards is probably something where we need more of a global approach rather than an individual country-specific approach as well. So I would put some, parameters like technical data standards there. I would put safety benchmarks there. and just more around risk assessment and reporting as well. So we've got 2 ISO standards now on AI. So I would expect standards and risk assessment and security more from a global angle, and then of course national safeguards within the global standard. But I think that's how the conflict is likely to play out, is my assessment.
Right. Christopher, I'll have your interventions and then maybe Ayushi can add up. Because I have one question which I'll ask all of you, and then we'll go to the second and third part of the session in the interest of time. But yeah, Christopher, please.
Yeah, of course. Following Francis and I have attended UNU AI conference for 2 consecutive years, so it's very honored to be here as well. So the previous speakers has already elaborated on most aspect of this topic, but I would like to make something from the perspective of European Union and UK. So I suppose this dilemma is definitely a new game of how AI should be regulated under national sovereignty and also internationally. So from the EU part, the EU AI Act is actually quite strict, I could say that, because any AI system just fall on EU borders and impacting EU citizens falls under EU jurisdiction. So this is quite a strict regulation of it, and thus affect many parts, because you can directly fine Italy if they are banning ChatGPT. Actually, this actually happened in 2023. But for the UK side, it's a little bit flexibility, because the UK pressed absolute control on defense AI, which also makes the case because the defense AI, military drones, such AI technology is vital to a national's interest. But from more parts, the commercial AI here within UK borders are more flexible. So it's not like the European Union. To be honest, I'm not quite sure about how the Global South regulation in compared to what happened in the European Union and the UK. But the regulations here in EU, here in UK, does affect many things, because the small and medium-sized enterprise gonna pay a large compliance fee to the EU government or the UK government. So there are many small, especially small and medium-sized enterprise, because the most AI companies start small. I could say that they're startups, and they are discovered by large corporations maybe. So these force many AI startups have to move to Switzerland and other parts of the world. This is definitely something we don't want to see here within the borders of UK and EU. So I think this is something we need to look forward. And I would also like to intervene what Director Jan has said about the citizens' participation in this aspect. For the EU side, I suppose the situation is not very good, because like more than 18% of the AI oversight power centralized in state bodies, in EU bodies, in the government bodies of the UK government. So the citizen participation is quite limited. Actually, it's only limited to the complaint protocols. This is definitely something we wouldn't want to say. We want more citizens' participation in the legislation and in every aspect of controlling AI and how to monitor this. So I would also love to hear more perspective from the Global South, because here in the EU and UK, we have many, things we need to think of, and many things we need to concern about. So yeah, so that's my intervention. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I really like where you say that it is always the smaller startups which actually begin the race in AI, and not race, but I would say that engagement, because unlike how it has been with traditional digital technologies in the Web2 space, the AI community is pretty federalized when it comes to startups. Like, you have research labs popping up across the world who are trying to come up with some niche around. And it's quite interesting how it happens. I think even in the Global South, some attempts have been made despite some bigger players. But yeah, that's an interesting take. I think we'll discuss more on that. but in maybe the second, third, and fourth parts. So Ayushi, the floor is yours, please.
Thanks, Abhivardhan. And I think there were some really excellent points that a lot of you raised here. I'm not like Dr. Zhang. I'm not really from a legal background. I've been involved in building a lot of these systems, and I think I've been on both sides as someone who has built these systems and someone who has consumed these systems again in my everyday work. So I think a lot of my perspective comes in from there. I think I will echo a lot of what Dr. Francis said, but with a little bit of deviation. I strongly think that we need a global standard in AI. And what do I mean by like a global standard? We currently don't have a unified definition of AI safety or governance that everybody aligns on. We consume models from different countries, from different providers, and we do so without any knowledge. Again, like Dr. Zhang pointed that a lot of the data that goes into training these systems, there's not a lot of transparency or understanding around what goes in there. And so I think we have a lot of precedents for successful global coordination. If you look at the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force for Anti-Money Laundering Principles, or if you look at 4G, 5G telecommunication standards, or if you look at, aviation standards, we've done this in the past where we've come together and we've, defined unified standards that we should all be adhering to and we should all be sharing in the global context. So just as an example, I don't go to Europe and I don't go to Europe and change my Wi-Fi, provider or my Wi-Fi technical applications. I just expect it to work the way that it works in India. And so because there is, no global definition at this point, there's a lot of play of, a lot of the things that Christopher also pointed out, that different governments are kind of fighting for this, across the world. Ideally, it should not be any single government entity that should be controlling this. We have, even within AI, you can look at, the work that Anthropic has done, where they came up with model context provider and, as a system to kind of exchange information between different models. Or you could also look at the work that Professor Andrew McStay did, where he's the IEEE chair for emulating empathy in AI systems, and he's laid out like a lot of the standardization guidelines. So yeah, I think my opinion on this would be that we come up with a unified system. I know Abhivardhan and we've had a lot of these tech policy law debates, like back and forth, like how many of these systems should we follow and how many should we even remember at the end of the day. And I don't think that there is any possibility for us to have any consensus if we don't come on this together.
Yeah, and I think those discussions are interesting because market and technical standards, the intersection around that has been interesting. Even Europol has come up with something. I'm expecting something else to happen from other organizations like ITU and ADB as well in Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific, or Asia Pacific as we call it. So that's there. So I think one question quickly to all of you, and maybe you can choose who wishes to add up on this. So I think one aspect is very clear, as Francis says, about the individualization of sovereignty, or let us say the individualization of sovereign equality. That's the Article 2 of the UN Charter. And that's interesting, since whether it is traditional knowledge or the use of algorithms in geospatial technologies or anything, since the current wave of AI documents that have come up, and by that I mean government AI sources. I'm not going to talk about private sources because then it is a huge list. It's like 1,000 plus. If we say government sources, it's still like 400, 500, something like that across the world. Even if we take like UN member states plus others. So in that regard, Dr. Zhang, I totally agree with you. In fact, even in India, similar initiatives are being tried with Sarvam AI and others, like IIT Madras is also working on indigenous models. But my question is, if we assume that the AI community, while is inevitably federalized or in its own way distributed, not in a regimented way, but in a very discrete way. despite bigger players, despite governments trying to do certain things in their own way, which is perfectly fine. That is a sovereignty question, and these debates will keep happening. Is there a possibility that keeping individualized sovereignty at heart, individual-centric sovereignty at heart, is there a possible way for making bridges? Because one way that sovereignty can be respected, and that's how we will go into the part 2 of the session, or let us say the second aspect of the session, which is proportionality in governance. That can there be a possibility to engage at a bilateral level? Because even Council of Europe has a treaty on AI and human rights, and other organizations are concerned. Even African Union has come up with something different, right? We wish we had some participation from that side of the world as well, but no worries, maybe next time. But I think it's an open question to all the speakers. Maybe anyone can start, Francis. Okay. All right. I think okay, this was an open question, but I think we can try to address this in the proportionality side of things maybe further. So in the proportionality aspect, as we go ahead, it's very simple as a question, because we have already seen some trends, and this is interesting that the speakers brought that up. Proportionality itself is a very important question. Why it is? Well, the reference that I gave was about diplomatic arrangements or business to business arrangements. So let us say we have ISO standards, right? Vishwam was talking about that. Knowledge management is one of those, and I think a few more have come on risk and other aspects of AI recognition. Now, when I hear feedback from people who are in Germany or other parts of the world, there's an interesting dichotomy. So a company like Microsoft comes up with a vendor policy that vendors who are accredited to Microsoft in terms of collaboration, they would have to adhere to ISO 42001, for example. However, in the EU, we have our Human Rights Treaty on AI, and of course GDPR, and therefore also the AI Act. But then, of course, in the other side, that is the East, we see that in India and Southeast Asian countries, people are more open to market standards. So let us say that there's a possibility of a bridge. There is a possibility of proportionality in governance. Is it about aspects of work competencies around AI innovation, which also brings us to the question of AI and science? Or is it more around the commercial setups around basic AI research, basic AI supply chain aspects? Because most of the debates have been largely, okay, fine, it's a compute issue, therefore you have come up with an order in the US to restrict compute access, and therefore it's a resource economics game, which again is a trade law question. But then if you look at from a science point of view also, is it possible in that regard to have more proportional cooperation? For this one, I think I'll try to start with Christopher, and then maybe Francis can add up, and then maybe Ayushi can add up. So I'll shuffle the order. So Christopher, maybe you can start, because you raised a very pertinent point from a UK perspective. So please.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, yes, I definitely think the compliance requirements is something to be concerned about, especially considering the vast gap, the vast the technological difference between the global south and the global north, right? So according, I suppose, from the EU perspective, so anything affecting EU citizens concerning AI technology falls on EU regulations. So this is how they are considering doing this. So this definitely related to the cooperations and technological advance from global south, from China, from India, from other parts of the world. But yes, I think this is definitely something to be concerned about, and I don't think they're perfect. They are having these discussions within European Union with EU member states on drafting a new AI law criticals about how we could address these most pressing issues from the global south. But from another perspective, the large corporations, something like Google, Microsoft, definitely need to consider about how they could, manage differently, between among different states that they have the sub cooperation with, like how they could manage things back in the States, here in the UK, and also in India and more global south countries. But I also understand there are many, good practice in African and in more global south nations. So maybe we could also incorporate their experience, like how the global south member states or corporations in general can manage their AI regulations, and we can make comparisons about how the EU can learn from them and how the global south can learn from the global north. Yes, that's my perspective. Thank you.
Sure. Just a quick follow-up before Francis adds up. Maybe if you have one example from an African point of view, if you'd like to highlight, maybe that would be a great add to this. It's up to you. I'll leave that to you, but yeah.
Yep. Thank you very much. This is a tough question, I think. A really difficult question. I would think it goes back to sovereignty, but let's start somewhere else. Let's start with science. And also, let's start with economics too, those two things. So science is knowledge, and knowledge is not divided up between global north or global south or things like that. So knowledge is something that science is also something that we all strive to achieve. And we know that the more participants we can have in our knowledge, the richer our knowledge will be, including the diversity of it and the different languages, the different perspectives, the different cultures, the different ways of understanding. So we know that from economics, what we want value. And we know too, for example, with data, that if you take data from someplace and you move it to somewhere else, you very often lose value because data has much of its value in situ, and that is where it's located. And when you take away let's say, the environment in which the data has been generated and in which it's held even, then you lose a lot of that connectivity, if you want, or interoperability, or all those things that may be digital and may not be digital. Then you lose a lot of that value. So what we want, I think, is a better understanding and a recognition of just really what science is and what's valuable. And I think if we do that, we will come maybe not to proportionality in governance, but recognition of, let's say, locality and place with regard to governance, and with regard to AI and data. One more thing I would like to say. The European Union, fortunately I'm in India right now, not in the European Union, but living in the European Union. The European Union is essentially an economic union, even if they want to pretend to be otherwise with recent events, but they're primarily an economic union. They're looking for value, and they're looking how to maintain the value of their economies. So when you see the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, or when you see the AI Act, you have to understand it in terms of Europe and Europe's own situation with regard to data and AI. And that is, Europe is not the place where most data is generated, and it's not the place where most AI engines are or will be generated. So what Europe tries to do is, although we don't own the data, and although we don't own the AI machines, then what we think, well, we could regulate them. And if we regulate them, then we will have some power over them and we'll have some authority over them. That has a cost, though. That has a price, because it means very high level of regulation, really regulating what doesn't belong to you, wherever you don't have sovereignty. So that makes the situation very complicated. And it makes it very difficult for, let's say, European scientists and academics and industry to build and to generate the data that they want for their work, or to build the AI machines that they would like in order to participate in them, because it's very difficult for me to move my data from my house to my neighbor across the street, and even more difficult to move it from my house to my neighbor in Germany or to my neighbor in India. So these are things we also have to consider with regard to governance. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll let Ayushi add, but I'll give her a hint on this to continue this further. Maybe I think Francis refers a lot about aspects around data migration, and I think I was in one of the sessions which were held by CoData, and I think the one aspect which is becoming interesting is data visitation rights as one of the aspects, not everything, but one of the aspects. So maybe I think Ayushi and Dr. Zhang can have some perspectives on this, because like in the case of Singapore and other Southeast Asian countries, I think it would be really interesting to see if a civic understanding of data visitation can be achieved. It can be contractual or bylaws based or other things. But I'll first let Ayushi add up and then Dr. Zhang intervene.
Yeah.
Followed by the commissioner.
First, I was hesitant to take up this question, but after hearing Christoph and sorry, the other speaker, Christoph and Francis, right? So I felt I probably get a better idea about what the question is asking, right? It's basically asking, for the less developed, smaller or poorer, less developed context, when the AI system developers from these regions should take the same responsibility or same burden of compliance compared to maybe AI system developers which have more resources, right? So the proportionality question here basically means that does the governance or the rules, do the rules apply equally without any differences to all AI system developers, right? My take on this is I always just ask myself, if we have something new, right, being developed, nobody is really sure who will benefit from this, right? Eventually, maybe we should just ask who are currently benefiting from this the most, right? And I am of the view that the parties who benefit from this currently the most should take the most responsibilities, right? So in this case, where I'm getting to, right? I'm getting to say that maybe these big corporates, right, which have the most promise to get tremendous profits from AI products, they should take more responsibilities. I say this based on my experience with social media corporates, right? Facebook, Instagram, all of that. When social media companies first came into being, there were also this kind of discussions. Oh, if you govern, right? If you come up with rules, you force them to comply, the innovations will be sacrificed, right? And all the companies will move from your country to another country. Economy will suffer, right? So all these arguments. so that we were hesitant to actually regulate social media platforms at all, right? And social media platforms had also a lot of their own arguments. They are neutral, right? They are not siding with any content. They're just providing a platform, right? They shouldn't take the responsibility for the content that is posted on the platform. But that was their argument many years ago, right? But it's no longer, it doesn't work anymore, right? Nowadays. Why? Because the way we look at governance and regulation changed, right? We think that since you are the parties which benefit from this, whatever you call it, neutral platform, right? Then you have the responsibility to make it right, right? So same with AI. We don't know yet how AI can do harms, right? How AI can actually threaten human rights, right? But those who will profit the most from AI, they have to take the responsibility, right? So in principle, I would say I agree with this proportionality principle, right? But again, the question is how, right? How do you actually force big corporates to take more responsibility? I was in a forum, some kind of AI forum in Singapore a few weeks ago, and someone, I wouldn't name the platform, a major platform's policy person basically said, you shouldn't regulate AI. AI didn't do anything bad yet, right? Look at EU, right, Christoph? Look at EU. They regulate so much. All the innovative AI companies left. That's why they are lagging behind in terms of AI technology, right? Yeah, you will hear this kind of arguments and discourses, but we have learned from our lessons, right, on social media platforms. So we shouldn't let them go. We should really focus on regulating them, right, and asking them to take the major responsibilities. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah. No, we really appreciate that. Ayushi, I think you can maybe add up some more context. Maybe I think it would be interesting how this can be achieved even in India, but I think you can have some perspective.
Sure. To be honest, I think of compliance as a third level activity in this entire affair. First would be interpretability, which is just understanding how these systems work, because a lot of it is still, really black box for us, especially as the capabilities of these models are emerging. Then probably standardization, then maybe governance, so it comes as a last step in the entire equation. But I don't want to answer this without talking about the fundamentals here, which is just understanding that a lot of AI systems are just deeply mathematical and statistical models at the end of the day. When we look at defining how we should look at all of these models, I think a lot of it should be defined by the level of human machine interaction that we notice on a day-to-day basis. And this is again something that should be defined sector by sector, or by use case, or application by application. And one of the ways that I think about probably approaching this problem is to define is to assess the impact, right? Or is to basically look at the cost of false positives versus false negatives in applications. So let's say you talk about AI systems in hiring, where AI is the interviewer, and there the cost of a false positive is that you actually let go of a candidate who's essentially quite good, versus the cost of false negative is you hire someone who's probably not the right fit for you. Versus if you look at it like in a drug discovery case, the implications are completely different. Same with banking, same with any of the other legal sectors. I think Vishwam is here, so he could add a little bit more about this. So a lot of it is actually defined by how human machine interaction is actually happening. Where the human is sitting in the entire process, is the human sitting on the loop, in the loop, is the human in control, is the human the consumer, where this exact placement is happening, and exactly what is the cost of false positive versus false negative. At this point, we're like Dario said, we're in a race with models. Either they outperform us, or that we're able to outperform their thinking, in which case we should be able to, we should be in a position where we should be able to mimic their understanding, and we should be able to then think about how do we govern this, and how do we look at cases for use cases for mass population consumption. So that's what I would say about this.
Yeah, that's a nuanced take, because there was an engagement I had with Healthcare Magazine about this, and they were asking, like, do we have any AI laws for hospitals in India? And I think uh, you know uh, it all starts even with contracts, because in the Indian data protection law, interestingly, it's an interesting point I just wish to make quickly. Uh, Unlike the GDPR, you really need, and I'm using the words from GDPR for an Indian law context. In India, we call it data principal, but basically that is data controller in the GDPR sense. So let us say there's a data controller and you have a data processor. Now, naturally speaking, data processor and data controller come under the same circle. But if data controller is not able to have end users, let them exercise their data protection rights, so there's some breach that has happened. In India, as per the DPDPA, the data processor might not be responsible. It would be the data controller, aka the data fiduciary in India, who will be held accountable as per the law. So I suggested that, and everyone has been suggesting in the legal space, that a data processor needs to have a contract with the data controller, that is a data fiduciary. It's a basic thing, but I think it's an understanding which has developed from a legislative point of view in India. Maybe it could be reviewed with some standards, because that's what has been the intent of the data protection rules so far. So without further ado, I'll quickly let Vishwam have his interventions, because I think we'll move fast forward on third, fourth, and fifth aspects as well. And yes, I think the papers shared by Francis are really helpful, and I think people should read them.
Definitely. Thank you, Abhivardhan. I think much of it has already been said. So not to repeat it, but just to sort of add to the proportionality and compliance angle. I think regulation should be based on what you're regulating as well. So I mean, we're obviously, saying more generic regulation at this point, but what would apply to, say, a narrow AI should be very different from what would apply to, a small language model versus a large language model. And now, I mean, AI agents is like the flavor in the market. So, are you regulating an autonomous agent? Are you regulating a human controlled agent? What sort of agent is it? Is it, a horizontal agent? Does it have a vertical application, etc.? So I think regulation and compliance based on what AI or NLP or ML model you're using, I think that is critical at a national level and of course at an international level as well. So I think just to add that point, I think because that would also determine and that's a fair, it obviously brings in the concept of fairness as well. If I'm only running a narrow AI, for instance, why would I be regulated to the same extent as someone running an application over a 60 billion model, for instance? And if I'm running autonomous AI agents, the regulation should be much higher than me running no agents at all, or agents in a very controlled environment, for instance. So I think that will have to be taken into consideration as well when laws and rules are drafted as well.
Great. So let's go ahead with the next facet of the discussion, which is about essential protective functions. Now, jurisdiction will be an issue, I think, even when bilateral cooperation is to be sorted out, which is one of the ways for a lot of business forums to interact through government sources like embassies and all. While I completely agree with, I think, Dr. Zhang at this point, that it's very hard to quantify some kinds of harms, and while it is not even impossible, it is possible. It has been done in a general context. I think the tussle has been as to whether the science aspect around AI is to be outweighed by the commercial aspects of it. And I think maybe that's the reason why there are some universal understandings that can be literature-wise interpreted. That yeah, these are some risk aspects which are understandable across the board. They can be quantified as case studies. Are they absolute enough to be consider a top-down priority, maybe through an international treaty or not, which is again very hard to do because restrictions. But I think we maybe to achieve some sort of proportionality, there can be some protective functions. I believe that they can be about, and this if they can be achieved in resource constrained environments, because I think we have to take into account that naturally the global south faces certain issues of their own sort. So to steer this aspect of the discussion quick, I'd let a bit of a shuffle, and I'd ask Vishwam to begin. And maybe then I think Francis can have interventions. And so I know that Vishwam ended this, but I'm starting. So.
No, thank you, Abhivardhan. I think, to be honest, when I was thinking about 3 to 5 non-negotiable protections, I was actually thinking about, the recent voluntary AI safety standards which have come out in Australia. I think they mention a few, and I sort of went back and checked, and I think I would largely agree. So they talk about transparency, human oversight, accountability, security, and fairness. Now, I don't think all 5 are non-negotiable, but I think some jurisdictions, they would probably pick 3 of them are non-negotiable. Some would pick the other 3. So maybe just to spend some time on that, I think transparency, I think, obviously there are different standards of transparency. Definitely, if you compare, say, the US versus Singapore or the EU, I think transparency in itself has different measures and different standards across the world. But I think in some form or the other, I think transparency and accountability is fairly basic. And, every system would want some transparency and accountability. And it can be in different forms. It can be accountability on, say, in terms of clear responsibility, whether it's for outcomes, whether it's for input, whether it's for what data you've used, for instance. Transparency can again be around, your system documentation, your disclosure around, why you're using data, what the purposes are. But I think at some level or the other, I think these 2 will probably be non-negotiable in most jurisdictions, is my sense. Human oversight is another one, I think, where would you want human insights? Of course, I usually spoke about the black box problem. I think that's going to stay for a while, considering how quickly some of these models are evolving almost on a daily basis. So where is the human oversight? Is it based on outcomes? Is it based on, certain other intervention capabilities? I think that's another factor. Security, again, I think that's probably best left to, light touch regulation in some sense. But, I think most enterprises would comply with ISO standards or with, other standards which are mandated by national regulators. And then I think the last one is probably fairness. I think that is actually an interesting one, because what is fair is, can to some extent be a jurisprudential question. But I think this is also where courts and tribunals and judicial decision-making bodies come in. So, ultimately when the rubber hits the road and you end up in a court of law on regulation, I think courts would, try to ascertain whether it was fair or not, or whether it meets the standards of fairness or not. So I think that would be an interesting non-negotiable protection as well.
Yeah. And on this one, honestly speaking, I would have Christopher have his interventions, but I think before that, I'll come to Dr. Zhang, because it's interesting that there are some facets. So accountability is graded. Okay, it can be oblique, which is a combination of being horizontal and totally vertical. But from a practice-centric point of view, let us say there were just 2 aspects of protections, 2 protections which could be feasible enough for a diverse region like Southeast Asia, because we as India can resonate with that. We face the same issues, right? And like there's an interesting work by iSpirit on this, where anonymization of data in healthcare has been a concern, related to symptoms and those kind of things in India. So let us say that Southeast Asia is a focus, and let us say that localizing aspects come out. That it's a diverse region, be it Thailand, Cambodia, Japan, or whatever. Technically, yeah. So what would be the most feasible? Like, any two of the aspects which Vishwam raised, the most feasible ones, which maybe could be possible. Maybe you can refer to the example of the, indigenous models, as you had said. So your reflections would be great on this. I mean, Vishwam just added the legal jargon side of it, but I think then I can add Christopher.
Thank you. I really love your questions. Although the questions are asked in a legal way, right? Which is not something I often use in my daily work. But I do feel that I somehow see the problem in a slightly different way when I read the problem in this kind of language. Right? I really appreciate that. Right. So let me, looking at this question, one thing that caught my eyes is actually resource constraint implementation environments, right? That's actually the most important part of the question I felt, because all these non-negotiable protections, all these AI principles, right? Accountability, transparency, fairness, we can just talk about them, right? Without any problems, without any challenges. The real challenge is the context that doesn't allow us to implement these principles, right? I can immediately think about Burma, right? When you have a war in your country, there are bombs, dropping on your head. What are the non-negotiable protections, right? None of them is non-negotiable, right? And when it comes to AI and digital protections, right? So, what I can only say this, I got inspired by one thing the Singapore model, AI model, added, right, in their framework, right? On top of all these principles, there was one thing called well-being, right? As one of the principles, right? So well-being to me sounds more like a potential result, right? It's not really about how AI should be built, right? How AI technology should be communicated, right? Explain nobility, all of this, right? Not about that, but about what AI might do to people and the society, right? This is actually a very high kind of principle because you don't know. Even the most genius developer of AI system, they probably don't know what AI will eventually do to the human species, right? So my point is, if you ask me, then what are the non-negotiable protections? I will look at the people, right, who need to be protected immediately from AI now, right? So these are non-negotiable protections, right? If AI is now doing harms to certain groups of people, right? I can imagine some, right? Some have already lost their jobs, right, to AI, right? Without any, support from the state or from the society to help them find another job or upgrade their skills, right? That's a problem, right? Then these people are the ones we need to help, right? In view of AI. So non-protection or non-negotiable protections to me, right? I suggest that we look at who are now being hurt, right, by AI. Then we go and protect them, right? Then later on, maybe some new AI, like generative AI, produce some new harms to certain groups of people. Like I heard from my children's study, children's study colleagues about how AI has been used to generate children pornography, right? Child pornography. Then these children need to be protected, right, from these harms. So that's the way. This is a very sociological way, I would say, probably not a legal way to look at your questions.
Yeah, and I think that's great because that's the purpose of this discussion, right? Bringing a sense of connectivity between technical, sociological, and legal perspectives. So it's great that you add up, and I think I have increasingly believed that interdisciplinary stakeholders are needed across countries in AI adoption, AI governance, because it's a huge problem right now. In fact, even in the developer community in Bengaluru and major data scientists, we call it India's Silicon Valley, even people are concerned that we don't have interdisciplinary stakeholders being involved at certain stages of AI governance, which is basically data governance. And who better than Ayushi can talk about it, but I'll let Christopher have his interventions. And maybe from a data governance point of view, maybe Ayushi can add up. So Christopher, if you can, yeah. Can't see you yet, but yeah. All right, I think there might be some reason. Ayushi, maybe you can add some interventions from a data governance point of view, like which would be the two principles. And it's interesting what Dr. Zhang has talked about, and maybe then Christopher can chime in. But yeah.
So on the onset, Abhivardhan, I think I have a opinion which might upset a few people on this panel. But yeah, I think I'd say it. I think a lot of what we're talking about, which is fairness and accountability and protection of people, I think these are very subjective and slightly abstract concepts at this point. When we talk about, language models, and specifically, from a AI public policy space or a legal space, a lot of these um, uh, um, a lot of these propositions are a little bit disconnected from the reality of how language models work and how they are assessed in real world situations. Like I pointed, there's a wonderful blog that Dario Amadei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, wrote very recently on the interpretability of large language models, and he specifically stated that we are in a race between interpretability and model intelligence. Building LLMs is expensive, but what's more expensive is actually understanding or evaluating how these systems work. I think one of the most common ways that a lot of LLM builders or AI model builders they come about this is, they publish results against like common benchmarks that are followed by the developer community or even by general public outside. And the fact is that a lot of these benchmarks are completely outdated. If you look at evaluating a language model with a methodology as old as Blue, which probably came out in the 1990s, probably playing catch to what LLMs. I mean, the capability of these models have transcended far beyond what evaluation methods existed like probably 30 years ago or 40 years ago, and we're still using a lot of that to evaluate how these systems work. Just to give you another example, let's say when we are building speech recognition systems, we use a metric called a word error rate. Now, what a word error rate does is basically it looks at substitutions plus additions minus, removals divided by, the number of words. And the problem with that is, let's say a model transcribes a 25 as a 25 as a number, and then you have another speech model that transcribes it as a TWENTYFIVE. Does that mean that one is right versus the other is wrong? That's not the case. But if you look at most of the popular benchmarks or public leaderboards that exist out there, you will actually, if you dig down very deep, you'll actually notice that there are some very large players who are actually governing how these matrices work, and some of them to align with how their own models perform in such scenarios. So I actually wrote a paper on this with my colleagues on this as well, which is how easy it is to hack these benchmarks and to come up with results that can actually inflate the performance of the real performance of how your models work. So I would say that a non-negotiable for me is at the first step just to have the right interpretability tools in our toolbox, to have the right kind of matrices and evaluation systems, which also evolve with the pace of how these models are being built and how these models are being developed and how these models are being deployed. And I think the evaluation has to be a lot more it has to be a lot more concrete. There has to be a panel which is responsible for this, not like a public leaderboard where anybody can go and upload anything and make any claim about anything. There's no one to sit and actually evaluate whether this person is making a right claim, wrong claim. Nobody knows about that. So I think as a first fix, I would start there and then think about the rest of the concepts that we spoke about.
Right. Christopher, we can see you now, so maybe you can have your interventions.
Oh, sorry for that, because I think I was offline for a while and I can't really type in the chatting box. So could I hear what we are talking about now. I'm terribly sorry, but I was offline just earlier.
Right. No, so we have been discussing, like, since jurisdiction is always an issue in AI governance, and localizing it becomes hard because multiple jurisdictions come up, and making it proportional is hard. Can there be some non-negotiable protections from a strategic point of view, which could be there? Um, uh, so that's what we were discussing. Vishwam said that there are some standards, and sometimes the roles of courts and tribunals come up. Dr. Zhang gave a sociological point of view on this, and Ayushi gave an implementation shake off, a reality perspective that, yeah, a lot of things can be a lot of abstract, the basic protective functions, especially because the main keyword for this is resource constrained implementation. So maybe that's where you can add up your perspective.
Yes, I really think this is, most, very important for us to concern about. And I would like to intervene from, from the comparative side between the global north and the global south, I think, because I recently also understand there are some, marvelous example from the global source, and actually it's quite, quite interesting to have, because they are normally, like, countries like Kenya, Brazil, they are not, the server provider to other countries, but they generally their own way, of how they regulate AI. Like in Brazil, they have, the community regulative approach, that their local councils, some of their local councils have the vote that they could block or employ some educational AI deployment. So I think this is quite interesting, local approach, because here in the UK, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think the local councils could have the vote, like whether a council here, a small council here in London, could vote or vote not to deploy AI from a certain aspect with the region of this council, because AI, the employment and the usage of AI is very large. Naturally could apply for a very large area. They can't vary within this local council, like the Cabinet Council of London, like the London Borough of Heathrow, like Westminster Council. So I think there are many, even though the global source do not, be the service provider, then they did take on responsibilities from many other sides, like they have the localizations approach to share the responsibility. And it's not a very universal, it's not a very universal thing, but I think we could also learn from their experience. Yes, thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting intervention. With this, I think we're left with two interesting aspects to discuss, but I think this comes up on, let us say, as an offshoot of the proportionality discussion, because let us say, and this is a principle in international law. So, for example, we know that regional organizations have an interesting role to play in international governance, at least in traditional domains. I'm not referring to AI. Like the European Union technically is a multilateral organization, but as also a regional organization because it focuses on the European continent. Similarly, ASEAN focuses on the region of Southeast Asia. We used to have SARC, but that's a different discussion altogether. But then we can come to African Union. African Union has member states from Africa. Similarly, we can say for arrangements like USMC and NAFTA, but then that's a different discussion altogether because these are trade arrangements. So subsidiarity in international governance is also seen one of the ways, because from a legal standpoint, International Law Commission loves this, the UN General Assembly loves this, the Security Council loves this. But then again, you have ECOSOC and other bodies, and even I think to an extent, UNESCO has appreciated, because I had participated in a readiness assessment methodology consultation, which they had done in India and Delhi recently. And yeah, it was fun in its own way because, again, the question of subsidiarity came. So this is a question which I'll keep a bit open, and maybe I think we'll shuffle the order, and I think I'll start with Ayushi this time. Do we think that some form of subsidiarity, like making things less globalized, but localized, but having something at a regional level is still a possibility from a cross-border point of view? I think the reason I'm saying cross-border, it's like something could happen, for example, between India and South Korea, or India and Singapore, or Malaysia and Sri Lanka, right? So is subsidiarity one of the ways to do so? Because maybe we can start with you, and in a shuffling order this time, maybe we'll go ahead with Vishwam, Christopher, and Dr. Sam, so as to we can take up the last part, and then we can come up with Q&A aspects. I'll just request the audience, if they have any questions, please put up your questions. We'll be happy to take them up later. I think we'll have an ample time, but yeah, Ayushi.
So here's what I think about it. Like, obviously, there are local alliances or local discussions that could possibly happen, but I'll still circle back to where I started, that we still need a unified framework, which is not, adhering to any governmental principles. Just sticking to the question, I think, which aspects of this should be distributed to non-government stakeholders? I think all of it. I would specifically want to suggest that the government should stay out of this. The government's role in this entire ecosystem should be to enforce and protect, but the decision making of it, the thinking of it, the arbitration of it should entirely be with non-governmental stakeholders that can really look beyond borders, that can look beyond any of those aspects, and then truly come up with like a unified standard that works well for all. And the reason I say this is, I mean, if I'm using a model that's out of China versus I'm using a model that's out of the US, just because something is banned, or the mention of a few topics is banned in a certain geography, that should not restrict my ability to learn or to know about them from another model provider or another geography. So just having that balance, when, say, as an example, that when language models are responding to your questions, that all the facts are stated as is, and a fact is a fact and not as a fact in a particular country or a particular geography that exists. So my honest opinion on this would be that all of this, in the entire oversight should be, and the decision making should be with non-government stakeholders. It could be players like ISAIL, it could be IEEE, it could be any of the non-governmental stakeholders, but the government should be sitting where, once these frameworks are defined, then to enforce and to protect, as Dr. Zhang pointed out, then to protect people from the applications of such harm that could be there.
Right. Maybe I think I'll let Christopher add a quick, and then I think maybe Vishwam can intervene.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I think this is a very interesting, question. How the non-governmental stakeholders could, add up, and what's their responsibility and accountability in this. So, from my perspective, I could say from another topic, because the ESG rating system is something like that EU has been deployed for a very long time. Like it's more than 10 years. It's more than 10 years. And unlike AI, the AI Act is quite recent actions. And so the ESG rating system is about something more about the climate part, the green finance part. The European Union and many EU member states introduce, the non-governmental stakeholders to verify whether a product apply for the standards that EU have already met out. So this caused a lot of concerns and problems. So some project program from China, from Asia, from other countries that is very far away. So whether EU should decide to give their ratings of ESG ratings and carbon credit on these project programs, and the EU can't decide it directly because it's very far away. EU don't have such power within with Asia, so it's too far away. So they give it to non-governmental stakeholders, to independent companies. This involves law firms, the account firms, and many other parts. So this definitely cause a lot of problems, because the greenwashing actions is actually happen because the system exists, because there are a lot of problems, because they could bribe the independent companies into giving into whether they are a new product, because there are many standards. They have to be new product, they have to be renewable energy, they have to introduce, be established within 2 years. So just recently German company has discovered that the non-governmental stakeholder, the independent company, covers a lot of non-green project into green project, and they are going a very long process to solve this problem. So I think it's definitely something we need to look into by the introduction of non-governmental stakeholders. And also I think there are many some principles that the government and member states have to hold, like about the defense system, about the general principle, like so I think this is definitely something, and also something like the civil liberty, and whether it's in conflict with the law of the member states. So there are definitely something that the governments need to hold it tight. But also, if we have to introduce the non-governmental stakeholder, which is definitely happening, we need to also introduce the accountability enforcement framework. We have to undergo regular checks, whether this company is whether this non-governmental stakeholder is actually carrying out this product. And we can't have what's happening with the ESG rating, the carbon credit, happen again in the European Union. The cost is very is very great. So I think this is something we could learn from the ESG rating system, the carbon credit system, to the AI applications, which is happening right now. Thank you.
I think this is an interesting comparison with ESG and carbon credits, and I think it's great. Vishram, maybe I think we'll have your interventions, and maybe Dr. Zhang can add up.
Yeah. I think maybe I can talk a little bit about what we're seeing in India. And of course, like the other members can cover what we're seeing otherwise as well. I think in India, we're obviously seeing, distributed regulation to some extent, whether it's for sectoral regulation. So for instance, I think this week or last week, we've had some draft consultation from SEBI on use of artificial intelligence in the Indian securities markets. So SEBI, essentially, which is the regulator for securities markets, is looking at how AI would be used or would be governed in the securities markets. We've seen similar committees being formed by the Reserve Bank of India for use of AI in financial sector and in the banking sector, and I'm sure other regulators would follow. To some extent, I think that's a good approach. Letting sectoral regulators regulate rather than having one overarching or one parent AI commission or committee, for instance. Even in other sectors, like we've seen, like the government has announced an AI governance board for AI in governance or for public delivery mechanisms, for instance. And the Consumer Protection Act, we've seen like advertising in media is, of course, a massive use case for AI. So we've seen CCPA, which is a regulator, as part of the Department of Consumer Affairs by the Ministry of Consumer Affairs. They've come out with their own principles on how AI should be governed. Of course, if you look at EU, right, the EU AI Act allows every country to have to define what the national competent authority would be, either the data protection authority or a new authority or an existing authority. So I think in some respect, I think that's a good and that's a welcome movement. Of course, regulators, technically, they're supposed to be independent from the government as well. But, different nations have different thresholds in terms of how independent they are. But within the fintech space as well, like we've seen the RBI come up with self-regulatory organizations. For instance, we've seen RBI give out licenses to industry bodies, which are now able to self-regulate their members in some spaces. We've had some success in the media and entertainment sector since 2021. So I think that is an interesting approach that we're seeing in India. Will it work? Will it not work? I don't know. I think from my perspective, I would agree that sectoral regulation makes more sense than one parent AI Act. Whether you agree with what the rules of the regulator are is a different question, but I definitely think sectoral regulation makes more sense. And of course, for healthcare, I'm sure Ayushi will cover, but the healthcare regulator comes out with regulations that would make more sense than every state government coming out with their own regulation. Like we're seeing in gaming, for instance, in India, there's a massive divide between everyone wants to regulate gaming. Every state government wants to regulate gaming, the central government wants to regulate gaming, all different ministries want to regulate gaming. And I can totally see that happening in healthcare as well, because it's actually, under the Constitution of India, it's actually a state subject. So I can completely imagine a clash of regulations and governance principles when it comes to healthcare in India, which is why I think you do need subsidiarity, but it has to be in a controlled manner, in the right authority making regulations and compliance requirements in that regard.
Right. And I think with that, I think we'll have Dr. Zhang's perspective, because she really found some resonance with the sector specific aspect of it. And I think, yeah, I think sector specific regulation makes more sense at times, because giving a stratified definition of a technology like AI, like that was the case in one of the annexes of the UNU AI Act, had some backlash, right? Like there was one proposition, I think in Europe or the UK, somewhere, some institution had suggested that why don't we regulate AI using model weights of a language model? Now, model weights is a quantitative basis, so it creates a bit of a hazy problem, assuming that these parameters and model weights are a threshold. So, anyways, but from a sector-specific point of view, what do you think, Dr. Zhang?
Actually, when I first joined this dialogue, I thought this question was for me. This really is what I work on. How to include multi-stakeholder perspectives into governmental decision making. Right. That's precisely how I define civic tech. Right. Using technologies to help citizens to input into public decision making, and also empower the citizens to make decisions on technology, right? So, but I heard, I think the previous panelists have shared great points, right? I heard universal standards, right? Yes, we still need universal standards, although we include so-called local perspectives into the process of coming up with some kind of universal standards, right? And I also heard that how if we don't manage this relationship, right, between very diverse stakeholders and maintaining the responsibility of a government, right, things could go very badly, right? And also, I heard that a sector-based maybe standards might be the better way to go, right? So I just want to make 2 points, right? The first point is I want to invite everyone to think about who stakeholders are, right? We often think about so-called non-governmental stakeholders in terms of organized interests, right? If we only focus on organized interests, there will be these so-called independent companies who actually are not independent at all and gain benefits or profits, right, from approving or giving ratings to these so-called green products, right? So we cannot just look at organized interests. We also have to look at sociological kind of interests, right? What I mean is basically marginal groups, vulnerable groups. These groups are actually sometimes the least organized, right, compared to other groups. They don't have the resources. They don't even have maybe time to take care of themselves, right? Because they have to just spend time making money, right, to make the ends meet. So we need to look at these so-called stakeholders, right? In the sense that because their voices tend not to be included in governmental decision making, right? That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is when we distribute the so-called decision making procedure, right? It doesn't mean that the final decision making power has to be distributed, right? That doesn't mean that the responsibility of the final decision-making power can be distributed, right? So the stakeholders, through various means, can input their views, right? The perspectives, their life experiences, all these harms they are experiencing every day, right, in their daily life. But it's not their responsibility to come up with a workable or a accountability mechanism, right, to protect themselves. If they could do that, they have done it already, right? They couldn't, right? You still have to rely on the powerful decision maker to make these accountability mechanisms work, right? So it doesn't mean that the government needs just release their power, right? It's a very irresponsible way of looking at so-called distributing your decision-making procedure, right? So that these are the 2 points, right? The governmental decision-making body needs to hear widely, needs to know diverse people, especially vulnerable groups, experience deeply, but it's still their responsibility, right, to figure out how to protect them, right? How to come up with universal standards that account for these vulnerable groups' interests. Yeah, so these are the 2 points I want to make here. Thank you.
Great. That's appreciated. I think we are in the final aspect of this discussion, which is technological relevance, which I think is something I usually would love a lot, which is that, maybe governance should be about actual technological capabilities rather than theoretical possibilities, because recently there have been some interesting publications, including a machine learning related paper by Apple on the limitations of reasoning models. And then University of Arizona and a lot of institutions have come up with their own works. Even Professor Subbarao Kambhampati has come up. So sometimes what happens is that even in India, an India AI competency framework was released. Now, what was the issue? And I think this one we have to keep it a bit short, because maybe we can give a few minutes for audience questions, because we started late. We started like in 8 minutes, so we will give space for audience questions. The competency framework actually refers that, what public officials should involve AI somehow, automation somehow in, public governance aspects, finance, or providing some schemes to be delivered and all that stuff. But the technical realities still come from basic aspects of data governance, basic aspects of basic accountability, not like high-level accountability, but basic accountability, which is like how much interoperable is a solution, and are we even aware if we are using them? So is this reasonable as a foundational point? And I think I will quickly start with Dr. Zhang for a shorter intervention. I'll ask everyone for a shorter intervention for this part, because we need to give some space for Q&A. And then I think we'll have maybe Christopher to add up, followed by Vishwa, and then Ayushi, and then we'll go for the Q&A quick. So what do you think about it, Dr. Zhang, and then maybe Christopher?
Yes.
Yeah. Or
Sorry.
Christopher? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry for that. First, I would just want to thank to Dr. Zhang's point of view. I think it's really important if we take the the marginalized community and other others' voice into the decision-making process, especially concerning such topics that could affect literally everything, every aspect of people's life. This is much appreciated and very new perspective for me personally. So I think this seminar is definitely a very wonderful opportunity for me and for all of us to share views on this topic. But and also for for this question, so I'm thinking first we have to admit that there is a very large gap between the global north and the global south, and also a very large gap between the countries and the regions who mainly be the data servers who are more advanced in in such technology, and forays who are not, forays who don't. So this is definitely something we need to think of it. I don't think there is a very mature system to solve this question yet. But I think from this perspective, the international organizations such as the UN nations bodies could really play more could play a more significant part in this. Like the UNU Global AI Network is trying to, to draft something, to draft some advice that we could apply to many other partners within the network. But I'm thinking the international organizations, especially raise your concern about AI regulations, really could take up more responsibility in coordinating different opinions and regulations and frameworks from different member states, so we could have and also we need to think of how to transfer these technological advance to the more to less developed states. I could say that, so we could reach out, could solve or try to solve the vast gap between different regions and different within this question. Thank you.
Great. Quick intervention, Vishwam, maybe for a few seconds or 1 minute, and then maybe Ayushi. But Ayushi, I'll give you a little bit more time, maybe because this is your area technically. But yeah, I'll just, because we have to take questions. Yeah. You seem to be on mute, boss. Yeah.
Sorry. So just quickly, I think, in terms of tech relevance, I would say risk-based regulation. Just to echo like what I said, like it depends on what model of AI you're using. What, are you using agents, SLMs, LLMs, pure NLPs? I think that should define regulation. I think more generally, I think more localized implementation as well. And then definitely, generally, I think law and regulation is guilty of following tech. Tech obviously moves much faster than law and regulation, which will happen in AI as well. It will not be different, but maybe law and regulation can slightly catch up more than what it has in the past few decades. I think that would be my recommendation, and I hope for that.
Yeah. So before Ayushi adds, quick point for her maybe. So what I've seen also is that a lot of times technical standards which are supported, and let us say it's an ISO or something, cybersecurity or something, it actually is corresponded by a market standard. So even if you don't have a law, market practices kind of create a normative effect. And this is something which is also defined in international law, which is like the concept of IS cogents. And Vishwam knows this. He's an ex-lawyer. He knows this. He's a legal tech guy. He knows this. Because international law is one of my favorite fields. So the normative effect also comes in that way also. If we take SROs for that matter, self-regulatory organizations, or if we take the subsidiarity. So anyways, what do you think about it? Just added some in Indian aspect masala for your point to be, and then we can go for Q&A.
So, I mean, I fully agree with what Vishwam said, and I think that has been my worry for a very long time, that I think, law and public policy has essentially been playing catch to technology, predominantly because a lot of these things you need to get a lot deeper into the domain to kind of understand. And just circling back, just going back to my previous remark, when I say that we need non-government players to come in, I don't mean that they're toothless in this entire equation. As Abhivardhan rightly pointed that, a lot of these can emerge from market standards, and they are good enough for some sort of a self-regulation to happen. And again, when we talk about a unified framework, we don't talk about one framework that serves all. We talk about, different use cases, different standards, say for empathy regulation, or for, how language models should respond to factual answers. Again, it could be, domain specific, it could be, application specific, a lot of those things, but still we need to have a unified standard, and we still need to have non-governmental players to kind of come into this entire equation. Having said that, how do we ensure that these systems are effective? Just by being relevant and just by being realistic. I don't think there's any other sort of way to put this. We recently actually published a paper at NeurIPS, which is one of the most prestigious publication in the world. And NeurIPS actually had a very, I mean, I kind of fell in love with it when I saw it. So they have a very clear standard of authors declaring how they've used AI in about writing their system, and how AI has been involved in the different stages of writing the paper. What I loved they just embrace the fact that, well, AI is here to stay. I mean, people are going to use it. It's just, let's just get them to be transparent and responsible about that usage, and we declare that in whatever capacity they've used it. So I genuinely do think that law and governance, it needs to be a lot more closer to reality, and it needs to really foundationally understand how systems really work. Again, a lot of concepts that we talk about are very, subjective. They're very abstract. If you talk to developers, they probably don't understand a lot of this jargon because they're so neck deep into building what they're doing, and they're probably not really that concerned about what are the individual level compliances that I have to follow at this point. And so we need to make it a lot more intuitive and natural and realistic in that sense. I also do think that we need to encourage a lot of intergovernmental and inter-stakeholder collaboration, as Dr. Zhang rightly pointed. We'd have to, and when we say that, we have to look up to people who are actually going in publicly, happily stating that we don't understand how these systems work. So yeah, let's get them to come and talk about what don't they understand about these systems. And then of course there are other people who can come in and help and then figure out what might be a good approach to solve this. When we talk about bias, it's a funny conversation that we're having. We talk about bias and we talk about doing randomized control trials probably with AI, but we don't think about involving economists into this discussion. And this is their domain. Like, they should be a part of this conversation as much as any person who's building these AI systems. So yeah, that's probably my 2 cents about this.
Right, and it's a great ending aspect of this session as well as this segment. We are open to take at least 5 questions at max, and maybe the responses can be very brief, not beyond that, because we already have elapsed the time. So any questions from the audience would be appreciated. It's better that people type it up. I think that would be better. So if there are any questions from the people, please feel free to, because if your interventions are really that helpful, if you mention of affiliation and name, we'll be happy to include that in the final outcome document of the session, because it won't be a transcript. Bahadur and I will be working on it in a different way, and we will also involve other ISAIL members, and the speakers will also have their say on that. So please feel free to add up, maybe at max 5 questions can be appreciated, but maybe we can wait for a few seconds. So please feel free to, your interventions are recorded, they are appreciated, we will acknowledge you. That's how things work. So please. Okay, so I think it seems there might not be a potency for some questions, but I would be very quick to summarize this. I think I was making some notes, so that's there. But yeah, thank you for the marks, Paula. And I think we had an interesting session today, because my fear was that we had to make it beyond something like a lecture or thing, and I think we achieved that, because there were some very interesting interventions. Maybe on certain points we could have expanded a bit more, but that's perfectly fine. I think it's a very interesting starting point from, I would say. But yeah, Ayushi.
Abhivardhan, sorry, I think some of the participants aren't able to type questions in the chat. Like, you might just want to check if they have the access or not.
Okay, then I think it's sadly a logistical problem, but this is well, then I think this is a technical error we faced, unfortunately. But
it could be that, or it could be just a Friday evening.
It could be just a Friday evening, yeah.
No, I'm very sure about it, because I do know people are messaging me and telling me that they're not able to type it in.
Then,
yes, because
if you want, you could just let people like unmute and talk. That would just be easier. We could just make it an open dialogue.
Yeah, let's do
I
that.
think, yeah, it's well, yeah, it's very funny in its own way, but yeah, I think well, we missed this one. I think we'll manage it from next time. I sincerely apologize for this minor issue. but what can we do now? But I think one thing we can do quickly, because I think everyone is there. So we are putting our email. Since questions could not be adhered, maybe points can be adhered, heard at least. So we are putting our email ID for everyone. If they can see the chat, they can send their suggested points to us, which they wish that might be included. And please send your name and affiliation. That would be great, because that would be, helpful for the final outcome document. So that could be amazing. And yeah, with this we conclude. Paula, if you have any remarks to add, that's up to you. But of course, we'll have a headshot together. That's definitely there. But please, any remarks from your end?
Just to say again, congratulations. This was a real dialogue. So that's why I say it's a treat. I have participated in numerous dialogues. I have organized numerous dialogues, but they're not really a dialogue, And this one was a dialogue of people that have the professional expertise and also the personal passion on the topic. So congratulations and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, that's great to know. And I think it was fun discussing, because even I have done a lot of committee sessions. Sometimes it goes bland, and yeah, but I think it was enjoyable today. Thank you everyone who joined. We are ending this, and yes, maybe some feedback points can be covered from the speakers once we terminate this session. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you very
It
much.
was a
Bye-bye.
wonderful conversation.